Okay, so welcome this afternoon to the session. The session this afternoon is called Who Are the Metis? And I apologize, there's no accent aigu over the E in this, but I'm not too worried about that myself being Métis, but if anybody's bothered by that, I just didn't fix that in the session, but that's okay. Today's session is brought to you by Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia, or ARPDC, of which I belong to the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, one of 7 in the group. We're also funded by Learn Alberta. So welcome and thank you for attending. Do land acknowledgement before we get going. So Tansei, I live on Treaty 7 land, which is the ancestral home of the Blackfoot people here in Calgary. There are also Dene people here at Sutina and Métis Nation Districts 5 and 6. I belong to District 5 here. And all contributed to the shaping of Alberta and Canada. There are people from Indigenous peoples from all over Canada here. I have friends from Northwest Territories or Inuit. I have friends from all over the country here, but this is a traditional home of the Blackfoot people here. So I acknowledge that. And I thank you for them allowing me to share the land and living in my home here. And if you do know the treaty area that you live in, or if you're one of the 3 school division areas that do not have treaty land near them, you can put which settlement you're closest to, or the people whose land you're living on that is displaced right now. So if you have not attended one of my sessions previously, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about myself. If you have, you can just tune this out for a few minutes because it's necessary information, I think, particularly in the work that I do, to let people know who I am and why I do the work that I am doing. So with ARPDC, we are called Designers of Professional Learning. And besides these online sessions, which I do approximately 10 for or teacher PD, but anybody can access these sessions that are through the ARPDC website. So I've had people across the country sometimes attend, or different places. And we also, thanks, I'm reading Treaty 6, thank you. And Zone 7, yeah. We also work together in curricular areas. This morning I was at a math specialist meeting to work with those teachers to give them some more information, inform them more about how to include Indigenous ways of knowing into the curriculum. Also, I do face-to-face presentations like we all do. Well, it depends on the person and what they're willing to do, but I do travel around the province at different times to do either some of these sessions that I'm doing here, or I've done full-day workshops with people, presentations, and then worked with school divisions to work on implementing some of their First Nations, Métis, and Inuit objectives for their particular school divisions. So I do welcome you. My background specifically is that I'm Red River Métis, from what is historically known as the Red River Settlement, which is what it was called after the Canadian government took over the Prairie provinces, that area around Winnipeg. And my family is from north of Winnipeg in Selkirk, Manitoba. My grandfather's family was specifically from St. Andrews, which isn't far from there. We get into a whole the script and land and all that kind of stuff. I'll explain that to you a little bit later, but my family did, in fact, have land along the Red River itself, close to, if anybody's been there, Lower Fort Garry, but that was during the script era taken away from them, and they were put into Oakhammock Marsh, which is the land that they were given. So there are land claim settlements involving my family as well in regard to that, because there are $1 million homes built on that land now. So that would have been my family's land. If you're Indigenous, you know that, or if you know Indigenous peoples, you know, we introduce ourselves with 2 questions we always ask people is, you know, obviously, what's your name and where are you from? So who are your people and where's your land? Santiago Cecilia, yeah. So yeah, I'm originally from Selkirk. Yeah, I live in Calgary now. Sorry, that was somebody else in the chat. I actually speak Cree. I am learning Cree, and I know that. Just looking again in the chat. Yeah. Oh, okay. It's because I say tanate, the way I spell it differently, but everybody spells a little bit. You're probably in the north in Alexander, I'm guessing. Yeah, that would be Woodland Cree, and I'm learning Wai dialect. My family did speak Cree, as a matter of fact. Speaking of that, there are 4 languages, and we'll get into that later, that the Métis do speak, which is French, English, Cree, and then Michif, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about later. My mom is a Mowat, so as you'll see, most of my names there are Scottish names, and the majority of my family is originally on the Métis side from Scotland, on my father's side as well, actually, and Beaudries as well. They're French Métis voyageur family from Alberta. My family did live in Alberta for a time. They had land at Fort Edmonton and Fort Saskatchewan, and that's a picture of my great grandpa there, James Mowat. There's a school named after him, James Mowat Elementary in Fort Saskatchewan, as well as a park for my family, Mowat Park. And then a street in Edmonton, it's James Mowat Trail. And then next to him is, if that picture is about the late 1800s, as far as I can gauge from family pictures that I have at home and trying to figure out time-wise. And then beside that is a picture of my grandpa and his brothers and his sister when I'm guessing my grandpa was about 6 years old from the picture that I can see there, how old he looks, probably about 1916. And then his two brothers, Stanley and Oliver, and my great aunt Tassie. I've been doing this work most of my life, working with Indigenous students, given that I was the only Indigenous teacher a lot of the time. Well, in Winnipeg, when I first started, I was the only Indigenous teacher in the school I was working in the north end of Winnipeg on Main Street. And it's the same school division I graduated from, which was Seven Oaks School Division. I think there's been a greater recruitment of students that are Indigenous to go into education programs, particularly in trying to train them in Indigenous ways of knowing to work with our kids, because there's a lot more being done in particularly Manitoba and Winnipeg, which is really great to see. And a lot of great materials coming out of there, actually, that I recommend to people to use. It's not the case in Alberta as much when I meet with teachers and talk to them, unfortunately. And I'm hoping that will change as well. Myself, the last couple of years, I did a project with KTCA, or Kataskanal Tribal Council, out of Red Earth Creek, with their outreach program, grades 7 to 9. It was based on the seasons, so fall, winter, spring, land-based learning, Cree language, and decolonizing it and indigenizing it for their particular cultures. And it really did inform me as to the difficulty of the task that it would be, particularly for those who are non-Indigenous. Now, I'm not First Nations, so I worked, very well with them in terms of communication, and they were amazing to work with. Our specialists that were there, and but because I do have that Cree Métis background, it was a little bit easier for me in some ways to really grasp it, and it definitely is the way that I love to teach and the way that I love to learn. Having that background, but I could see how that would be quite difficult for a lot of non-Indigenous people, particularly in teachers, educators, that it would be pretty tough. And the two things that I always have said to me in sessions, whether it's face-to-face or online, is that teachers, educators in general, just are mindful. They don't want to be disrespectful to our cultures, and they also don't want to appropriate. And so I appreciate that very much. And so I do my best to guide people in doing some of that work. And the answers that I don't have, because I do not have all the answers. And I don't trust people who say that they do, I'll be quite honest. But I know people, and I can try to find out. If I don't know, I can find resources and I can try to talk to people. With that said, I'm going to continue on with the session, and I do offer, obviously this is my area, particularly the Métis, information about, what my growing up experience and where I come from, and it is different from Alberta, and I am learning some things about that as well on the chat. So, okay, so Alexander, you're saying you learned that from the Rupert Sun Institute. Oh yeah, okay, so that is the Machif version, though, even though that's still spelled in Cree. Interesting. Huh. It is very close. Yeah, because Tante, I'll show you later. I can even show you later how it's spelled a little bit differently. But Tanate, Otsin Kia is in Cree. That's how we say that. So, yeah. I know because I've been working on all that. I can say my prayer now in Cree. I can introduce myself for sure. I can do all that stuff, but I'm working on some of the other stuff too. I just want to show you guys the AirPDC resources before you get any other places and start things. You can always start here to look for things for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resources. These are all Alberta resources created by Alberta educators for Alberta. So it's a good place to start. And I do really encourage people to look here. Like I always tell people when I'm researching, I see this referenced all the time, especially this particular website, Empowering the Spirit. It is very deep in terms of layers of material in here. And when I'm researching, I see it on post-secondary websites, especially for education programs. I see it on library services websites, and I've seen it in the United States as well, referenced. So it is a really good site. And I always tell teachers, start with the Orange Shirt Day and beyond. If you do nothing else with this website and you don't have time, because I know you guys are all busy, go to the teaching tools. There's lots of really good stuff on there you can print out. There's division leveled posters for things like sharing circles and for Orange Shirt Day and beyond. There's lots of stuff in there. And then the other section here for searching, if you haven't used this, there's tons of resources on here, period. But I'm just looking at the First Nation Métis Inuit resources. So I'm going to go to focus. I go there. Of course, it brings up all of the resources that you can find. Whoops, sorry, I'm a little bit too fast for it. For my internet, not the site. And there are some things on there, like I know that I've seen in print, like the Buffalo. Buffalo is our education is our Buffalo. Yeah, sorry. Oh my gosh. And then yeah, our way is a valid way. And you can search by audience, you can search by level, and you can search by type. So I encourage you to start there. Sorry if I'm a little rough today. I'm going to be quite honest, it was a rough week last week. There was a lot of stuff happening here in Calgary. We lost 3 people, Indigenous people and homeless people in a fire and in a shed outside of Lowe's on the Thursday night. It was a vigil, and then I woke up Friday morning to find out a girl that I'd worked with for 8 years and taught piano at my home had shown up dead on the doorstep of the drop-in center in Calgary. So I went on Friday to sing and drum for her mom with some people there, and yeah, it's been a rough few days. So I'm sorry if I'm a little tired. I'm trying to focus my best as I can, but I'm not sleeping so great. It's unfortunately a part of being in our community is that happens a lot. We have a lot of bad news in general, but this one kind of hit home. I'm going to start with first, who are the Métis in regard to, because that's really what this presentation is about. And the reason it came about this way is that I'm often asked these questions. I'm often, as a matter of fact, approached by people, particularly from the East Coast of Canada and parts of, I would say, Ontario, that will say to me when I'm talking to them, because I present, and they'll say, oh, I'm Métis. And I'm like, okay. And I'm always, again, like I said, our first questions are always, who are your people and where are you from? As Alexander was just pointing out, like you're taught that expression, right? Where are you from? And then I find out from them as I speak to them generally that they are in fact not Métis. They are mixed race, possibly somewhere in their lineage. There is First Nations, ancestors, which is awesome. And I encourage them to find out about that, but they are not in fact Métis. And so this is actually a video, and this is Will Gooden, and he's my aunt works with the Manitoba Métis Federation, and I've met Will, as a matter of fact, at some of the consultations that they did across the prairies for some meetings and things like that. And he's a very knowledgeable man, and a couple of them that present and are on the council with David Chartrand are just their knowledge of our history is just amazing, and I learn something new every time that I'm with them. But will explain this to you in regard to this lady here who claims that she's Métis, and he's going to explain why she's not, and the people that she's claiming are not.
People have to understand the true meaning of a Métis, which is a person of mixed identity. Not just 2, could be 3 or 4, but it's a person of mixed identity.
They look at their family tree and say, oh, we've got some ancestry. Now I'm Métis. Be who you are. Don't be us. And I think that's what we're trying to say.
The 2016 census revealed that in some parts of Eastern Canada, the number of people who self-identified as Métis jumped by over 140%. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled on 2 cases that attempt to determine who is Métis, but it's a complicated question. In 2003, the court ruled that Métis hunting rights are equal to the rights of other Indigenous peoples, but the court needed to identify exactly who would be entitled to those rights. So the Pauli test was created to determine that. Among other things, the test requires an individual to be a member of a current Métis community and be able to prove an ancestral connection. 13 years later, in a different case, the court ruled that the federal government, not provincial governments, are responsible for laws affecting the rights of Métis peoples. But the court didn't specifically define who was considered to be Métis. There is yet to be a court case that affirms the rights of any Métis organization other than those that come from the Red River region in Manitoba. Some say the lack of clarity on who exactly is Métis has created a misconception about who is entitled to Métis rights.
Being Métis means that you are a part of that distinct nation, that distinct people. I think there's a move away from, again, from the understanding that we're Métis because we're mixed. If there is someone in Nova Scotia with mixed ancestry, who is it for me to say who they are? I can say who I am, and I can probably say that they're not us, which is where the whole disagreement comes in.
You know something, I could care less. I know what I'm doing in my heart. I know what I'm doing is right for my people, and I'm going to continue to do it. Laugh your heart. I'm here. I'm staying.
The Manitoba Métis Federation is recognized by Canada as an official Indigenous government. It represents up to 35,000 Métis people. Eastern Woodland Métis Nation of Nova Scotia is not recognized by any government. Parker says it represents over 70,000 self-identified Métis people.
What criteria does the MMF use to define its membership?
You have to self-identify, which is the fairly easy part of it. You have to have a connection to the historic Métis Nation, and you have to be accepted by the contemporary Métis Nation.
You must prove to us that you have Native heritage from Nova Scotia, from the Mi'kmaq people. And it has to be at least, well, we don't put the generations, as long as you've got a drop of Indian blood in you, you're Métis.
Is there a cutoff point for how many generations back?
No, it's not fair. You are who you are.
At what point would an applicant get denied membership?
Well, if you were unable to prove your connection to the historic Métis Nation, then that would be a reason to deny.
Oh, if you go too far back, I mean, we just study. Actually, I don't think, because I don't think we've ever denied anybody. I don't know how I'd go about answering that question.
But you don't think that you've denied anybody entrance to?
I don't think we've, no. I don't think so.
There's a pretty big problem out there with what they're doing, and again, I'm careful, but there's some pretty big issues that they've got. They look at their family tree and say, "Oh, we've got some ancestry. Now I'm Métis. Now I can hunt just like these other people, and I'm going to start my own nation." If they are able to use that word Métis, then I think it calls into question our own nation, but our own people. But
I want recognition from my people. God, I've been in this business since 1973. I should know something. But the further ahead I walk, the further I go back. 2 steps ahead and 3 steps back. And it's pissing me off. I want people to understand that we are different from the norm, yet we are the same. Okay, we're only different because of our culture. We can't practice our culture because we've been put into the white man's culture. They would never let us practice our culture. I'm only a simple woman. That's all I am. I don't know how to go about all this to develop a community. I don't know if we'd be accepted, but to heck with that. If we develop a community, that's it.
I'm not saying that we don't need to have a conversation with those people who live in Quebec and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. I'm saying I don't think we need to be scared of that conversation, but we need to be able to say what we say, and I think the facts speak for themselves more than anything.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to go into explaining a little bit more than like, who are we, right? And I think that would be the issue. The main one for me is, and I actually, interesting, I had my last Cree class was last Tuesday, just for this year until next year. And the elder, because I do this work, and he was talking to me about using our voices, right, as learning our language and what that means to us, and reclaiming the language for me, for one thing, is just that connection to my heritage, my culture that I never got to have. My grandpa didn't teach me, or my cousins. My mom learned a little bit from him, but my aunt was never taught. And there's meaning in the language, and there's strength in the language and that part of your culture, because it brings everything together in a way that I can't explain. But what the elder said to me was, you need to be brave, and you need to speak your truth, and you need to not be afraid to say what is the truth about any of these issues. And that is one, right? And like Will said in that video, cool. If you have, like, especially people out east, I always say to them, you have Mi'kmaq in your family, that's very cool. Learn about the Mi'kmaq culture, right? Learn about them. It's a very interesting thing to learn about, but you're not Métis, you're not part of us, right? Tracy's question in the chat: was this lady trying to say that she is Métis because she has mixed ancestry between the Mi'kmaq and other cultures? Yes, exactly. That's what she's saying. And this is a problem across Canada, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, because I don't really want to talk about that. And I'm not necessarily equipped enough to explain what's going on in Ontario, Quebec, and Eastern Canada, and even parts of BC, because I don't know the intricacies of it. What I do know is that there are all these people out there, since, like Will was saying, the courts have ruled that we have hunting rights and harvesting rights. And as a matter of fact, the Manitoba Métis Federation is using the Manitoba Act, which was Louis Riel's treaty with the Canadian government, because Manitoba was not part of Canada when they came in. For instance, what was called the Red River Rebellion was a resistance. It was not a rebellion. We were not part of Canada yet here out west, including Alberta, which wasn't until 1905. And people don't realize that. So when they hear that, they think, oh, the Métis were this rebellious people. No, the Métis, along with the Cree and even the Ojibwe, were fighting against the government coming out west, because they were taking the land, which was not theirs, and they were just taking it. They already had the Hudson Bay Company out here, and the Northwest Company fighting over everything, which is what most of us worked for. My family, the Hudson Bay Company primarily. So there was all these different groups fighting, but now we have people across Canada claiming, like in Quebec, the Métis Association there, one of them at least, I know I saw their websites, all it says is if you're of Indigenous and French ancestry, you are Métis. Well, I'm going to show you who we are, right? And yeah, there's some of that, so I'm going to skip that, right? I'm going to explain to you guys so you know exactly who we are, as when you're talking to people who are the Métis. Because Métis as a word does mean mixed in Old French. It does, but there's Métis people in Africa, in Senegal and Congo, that are called Métis because they were mixed people. Are they part of our nation? No, they're in their own group. There are people in South America that are of mixed Indigenous there as well, and of French there. Are they Métis from here? No, they are not. So when we speak Métis from here, we're talking about people from the Red River area, where my family is from, and that area was part of Rupert's Land as well, that became Manitoba. So it's really important to understand that the historic Red River Métis were a French, and I say French Canadian now because to understand, like, the people that came here, yes, we're from France originally, but they very much adapted to here. So you think more French Canadian people in that context, right? Scottish and Orcadian, and Orcadian, yes, Orcadian is part of Scotland, but they have a different language and a different culture, and somewhat. And so I'm a mix of Highland Scots and Orcadian Scots, myself and most of my family, and some French. And then they took Cree and sometimes OG Cree wives. And my family started off in the north of Manitoba, so they were Swampy Cree, and then moved to the Red River Settlement, where they intermarried with Plains Cree Métis people as well. So that's another reason for some of the differences in the Cree language in Manitoba, is a kind of a mix in some areas. It's really important to understand that, again, like they said in the video, the only organization that is the national Métis organization, and I'm not talking about the provinces, and I'll get into that, is by the Canadian government, is the one Manitoba Métis Federation. It's important to understand that. So President Chartrand, David Chartrand, there is the only one who's recognized as a federal leader of our people. So just understand that too. And in order to have membership with them, you have to have proof of the origins to the Red River settlement. It has to be detailed. It's a verified family tree. And you also have to have script in your family that was authorized by the Canadian government to show your connection to that part of Canada. So it's really important. And I don't want to, like, again, like I said, I don't want to get into it too much, but I do want people to understand kind of where some of these controversies come from. And when people say this, and when you're teaching about who we are, it's really important to understand that. And so this is, and I don't want to get into the video of it, but just explain. So there's an article here that you can look at. So what does Métis mean? A look at who qualifies as Métis under the Supreme Court ruling. So there is an article here that you can look at. What exactly does it mean? And it does mean mixed ancestry of First Nations and European originally. But, you know, I have my brother Dirk, who's Métis from my mom's side, like I am. He married a woman whose family is from the Philippines. So his children are, in fact, Métis, but they're also mixed Filipino and Métis as well. So they're mixed again. They're still Métis because they can trace their roots back to the Red River settlement as well. And then the Manitoba Métis Federation has an explanation on their website as well, talking about that, you know, and just some of goes into the battles that we've had, you know, to defend the land, you know, and just the reign of terror that went on, and you know, some of those things that you guys may not know about that we'll talk a little bit about, some of the scary stuff. And then we are in there was consultations, and now they've actually taken it to the Canadian government, to the I can't even, like I said, I can't speak today, I apologize, to the government, and presenting it to have it ratified as essentially the treaty that it was meant to be in the formation of the province of Manitoba for our people. You know, and to have those rights. So things like having healthcare covered, you know, like prescriptions are covered, for instance, for seniors in that province, but I cannot receive any of that because I'm outside of Manitoba. So hopefully that will change, that I could actually be able to receive those benefits. That our children, you know, could receive other benefits as well, and different things that are closer in line to what First Nations people receive, because we're not included in the Indian Act, just like the Inuit people are not as well. I'm going to show you a copy of the Métis territory map. Now, I'm going to be honest here. The Manitoba Métis Federation map is this one, okay? Now, I know the one for Alberta, so Alberta, like I said, I can't speak today, I'm sorry. The Métis Nation of Alberta has a different map and includes more of Ontario and BC. We do not, the Manitoba Métis Federations, there are some differences there in what federally is accepted as part of the homeland. And I always explain to people too, I explained this to somebody the other day, the reason we call it homeland is because this land is First Nations land. Right? We recognize that as Métis people. This is First Nations land. Our cousins, and I do even have cousins that are First Nations, because my great aunt Tassie, she married a gentleman who was fully Cree, my great uncle Wallace. And so my cousins are First Nations and Métis as well. And that happens a lot. You know, but just our cousins, period, are Cree and Ojibwe, right, in general. And so we shared this land with them, and there was no fighting about that. We worked together. We fought together. If they needed help, we helped them. If we needed help, they helped us, until the government got involved. And so that's where that, of course, the government decided to do that on purpose so that they could cause problems. Also to point out too that Métis settlements in Alberta are a completely an anomaly, and didn't occur until the 1980s, that these were solidified, the 8 settlements, which is, it's awesome for Métis people here, but it's the only place, just so you know, on the prairies that has these for Métis people, and they can live a more traditional kind of life, which is really awesome. Because you've got Buffalo Lake, East Prairie, Elizabeth, Fishing Lake, Gift Lake, Kagino, Paddle Prairie, and then Pavine, right? So those are places that have. But when we talk about settlements like the Red River settlement in Manitoba, it isn't an actual legal settlement anymore where we have a space of land. And actually, the Manitoba Métis Federation right now, that's part of what they also want to negotiate, is to have some land where people can just go and live, if that's what they would like to do, is live traditional lives with, you know, without that kind of, you know, restriction on them. And so that's one thing they would like to negotiate. And there is lots of land in Manitoba. And of course, it would be someplace that would be far removed from other areas, and it would have to probably come from Crown land, likely. But I mean, that is a possibility of something happening like that in Manitoba as well. Like I said, if you do guys have any questions along the way too, I try to leave some time at the end to ask more questions, but hopefully I'll explain a little bit more. So I do want to now talk, obviously we live in Alberta, so let's talk about the Métis Nation of Alberta. And I just, so you know, I am actually taking the Rupert's Land Institute course right now about us, so the Métis, because I would also like to know more historically about specifically Alberta, right? And so I'm doing that myself. A lot of the material I'm going through, I'm like, yeah, no, I know all this stuff, but when it becomes very specific, and that's what I'm working on right now, actually, and they're talking about each of the settlements and things like that, and so I'm learning more about different Métis areas in Alberta, which is really interesting. But the Métis Nation of Alberta recently created their first, and I just want you to know the name is redundant. So Otipemisiwak, it means Métis. It comes from Cree, and then so it's called it's Otipemisiwak Métis government. So it's redundant, but I know First Nations do that a lot of times too. So to explain it to people so they understand. But so it is the first Métis government that is recognized also by the federal government as a provincial government. So just so you know, and so that's a good thing because it's really cool. It gives all kinds of, like we've been doing consultations too, and working on including Métis content in the curriculum and things like that to take to the government of Alberta to, you know, to present to them and say this is what we should have. And you know, hopefully there'll be funding to do some of that kind of stuff, and more Métis rights being solidified and being able to really, you know, look at on a provincial level what's going to go on. So, you know, that's really cool. And then we've got the Métis in Alberta, so albertamétis.com. So this just gives you, if you wanted to look at this later, some more information about the history of the Métis Nation of Alberta here. And it has a long standing history, and the Métis go back far in this province as well. Like I said, my family was here too in the 1800s. And, you know, it was originally formed, in terms of the year, 1928 is when it was officially formed, right? As basically the founding fathers here, they called them the Métis Famous Five. And you can see that picture of those gentlemen there. And so that they started off, you know, to try to have rights for Métis people in this province. And so they started it back then. And then there was the Métis Betterment Act in 1938, which they also worked towards helping out with. And on this page is really good too as well. If you're looking for information about the Métis, there's basic history that's here. There's a timeline. And then it just gives you, there's a copy of Otipemisiwak, the magazine that you can look at. It gives you lots of information about Métis culture and events in Alberta too, if you're looking for that information. And then recently, and I have a copy of this, because if you were Métis, you got a free copy of this if you asked them to, so it's really cool. Got a copy of this book. So again, it's the history of the Métis in Alberta. And I do feel those ties, right? Because my family did live here for a time. Like I said, my great grandfather's, you know, obviously been here because there's school and park and street named after him. So I do have those ties. So I do feel proud of that. You know, so I'm trying to learn as much as I can in regard to that. But there's a copy of the book there. That's the true Canadians, right? And my aunt often says that, you know, about the Métis, because she always says we're a bridge, right? We're a bridge because we understand both sides of it. Although the real definition of two-eyed seeing in it from a First Nations perspective is not the one that I'm going to explain to you, but in a sense, we always do that, right? I always see things from both sides. I see things from that colonized side, which I don't agree with, but I understand parts of it, and I see the First Nations part of it, which I'm learning more about now as I get older, which I wasn't allowed to learn when I was younger. I know that a lady that another teacher that I was working with, and she's amazing, and she's worked a lot with the Rupert's Land Institute as well. And I want to get a t-shirt made. She said that we're post-contact pre-colonial people as Indigenous people. And I think that describes us perfectly, because definitely we're after Europeans came, but our people married, the men that married the First Nations women followed their traditions. They brought some of their stuff, and I'm going to show you some of that, but they really, embraced First Nations culture as well. And like I said, with my family speaking Cree and that sort of thing, it's part of our DNA as well. Not going to get into details of this, but here there is a really great timeline, and I thought I'd include this for you guys. It's a PDF. It's 8 pages long, and I like it because it goes through, specific incidents that are really important throughout Métis history from the Gabrielle Dumont Institute, and I encourage you to go there as well. There in Rupert's Land has amazing resources for you. And then on the Canadian Encyclopedia, and I love actually the Canadian Encyclopedia. I used it a lot, even when I was working on the KTCA stuff in terms of curriculum for the kids, because it's really done well and they update it all the time. But yeah, really good explanation of the Red River Colony here and the Hudson Bay Company's role in this and what happened with Louis Riel and how this led to this resistance, and then the execution of Thomas Scott, and then what happens with Manitoba, and then again, like you said, resistance or rebellion, right? What is it? So it's an interesting one to look at. Sorry, but somebody in the chat. Yeah, the PDF for that timeline is really awesome. So that's why I wanted to encourage it for you guys, because I think it's a really good visual for teachers, and for if you've got older students, they can look at it. I would take it and get them to highlight it or something, or highlight it before you print it, just because it's very wordy, or you could modify it if you want. So we're gonna look at the Métis script. So this is what defines a membership in the national organization, right? To be able to trace your people back. And there's a problem with it because there's some people that lost their information or got burned in a fire or whatever you have. And so unfortunately, there's people who cannot do this. And so they're not allowed into membership of the organization. And it's a sore point with a lot of people. And I can see that. I would be mad too myself. But this is where we're at in terms of identifying people and tracing them in terms of paperwork. So after the Red River Resistance and the Métis Nation basically was quashed and Riel was executed, the government of Canada created Manitoba, and that was under the Manitoba Act, which was created by Louis Riel, right? And as I said, it was supposed to be a document to create a treaty for us as a nation. They set aside this land, this 1.4 million acres for us. But what happened was the grant was exhausted, and then they started to supplement it through the script distribution to individuals rather than doing it as a collective people. And this is what happened is, and like I can give you the example of my family, was they took away the land that they had because the system was based on the French system of land. So if you know about that, back to feudal times, it would go to a river and it would be a strip of land. So people's houses would be close together, but then the piece of land would fan out. But that way everybody had access to farming and the water and all the things that they needed, and they could help each other as well because they're very much a community that way and close to each other. They took away that system, of course, because they wanted to divide up the land the way that Europeans do into little, square sections and that acreage kind of idea, which changed how people lived and then on farms and things like that. But they also, quite honestly, tricked people too. They sent in people from Ontario to buy back the script that people had, gave them cash for it because people were very poor at that time. And sometimes they took the cash and then they were left without any land at all. And then we add on to that the road allowances. So my family luckily was not a product of this. We did have land. It wasn't the most awesome land after what happened, but at least they did have land. But there were communities throughout the late 1800s and even to the mid and late 1900s. And we're talking like getting into late 1970s, early 80s. They were actually people that were Métis living on road allowances, which meant they were areas that have been designated for road creation. And so they were not, how do I put this? They were legally it was government land, but it wasn't being used. So the Métis would set up homes there, and so because they had nowhere else to go because they got kicked off their land. And then the government would go in at sometimes when just demolish land. They also, in the 60s, when people were out harvesting in St. Bernadette in Manitoba, They went in to everybody's homes. They burnt down everything, their homes and everything they had. They shot their dogs, their horses. They took everything from them. People came home from harvesting and everything was gone. And this is the late 60s. So it is not so when people talk about that with the Métis, they think it's like this historic 1980 or 1880s kind of thing or early 1900s, but it's not just then, right? It's still going into the 60s, this late 70s, early 80s that this has been happening to Métis people, unfortunately. And a lot in Alberta were road allowance people, and there's books written on it. So if you wanted to look up books like on Strong Nation or Good Minds, there's plenty of books about road allowance people there too. I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to get through all this because I do have some other videos, but I'll leave that for you guys once you get the copy of the presentation to go over. But just so you know, we do have a distinct culture, and sometimes that's hard to define because I know that some people will say, well, you know, some of our stuff lapses and that kind of thing. But you know what? I like to say what Will Gooden was said in presentations when he said this. He goes, it's called the Red River Jig. It's called the Red River Cart. Right? We start talking about these things. It's the Red River settlement. All these things go back to the Red River and very much a combination, you know, of all those things. Although we've mixed things together, you know, with our First Nations cousins, we definitely have a distinct culture in terms of many of the things that we do. We're also related through kinship, familial ties of marriage, battles fought together where we've lived together. So a lot of the time we do have those same kinship ties as First Nations people do, where we'll call people's auntie and uncle or, you know, cousin or brother, sister, even if they're not actually related to us in DNA. So a lot of the questions we ask each other, like when we talk to each other, like, is that a family cousin or a cousin? We'll say that, right? And, or like I have a friend that I call her my little sister, right? And she's Métis as well. And I'll say that my little sister, and they'll say, "Oh, you have a sister." And well, not technically by birth, but she's my little sister as far as I'm concerned. So we're a lot like that. We're also related through those battles, right? And I've listed some of them here, and I've got a link to a PDF as well that you can look on the Métis Museum to see what these battles are about and how they came about. The Métis sash, there's different meanings different people have for it, but this is the one that I've been taught. So just so you know, these are the teachings I received for this. Is the center, is the red part, is the Red River that goes from the US to the Northwest Territories. And there are two Red Rivers in North America. One is also in the southern states. The blue and the white on the sash represents the flag. The green represents the prairies, and the black is the dark times, or what is called the Reign of Terror, which is after the Reign of Terror. And getting into that too much, but that had a lot to do with the government sending out people from Ontario, particularly after the resistance. And the reason that particularly people like my family that stayed in Manitoba hid their culture was that you could be arrested, you could be killed. There were horrible things happening to people based on, and this is the next part, the red edges on the sash represent the martyrs killed by the Canadian Volunteer Militia, the Orangemen, and the Canadian Army. Basically, Queen Victoria told Johnny MacDonald that he needed to deal with the Indian problem, and that involved the Métis, particularly out west, and she wanted that done because she wasn't going to send him any army to support, and she wasn't going to help him with getting anything done for his railroad unless he did that. And so he did that, and in a very cruel and horrible way. Michif is definitely the Cree and the French mainly the combination, but it's not, it's a cross-cultural language. It isn't a fused language. So just explain that. I have a chart because in the course that I'm taking as well, they have a chart and it's really cool of, you know, Michif and Cree, because now that I'm learning Cree, I know that the difference, and there's some similarities for sure. There's differences in terms of the verbs and the nouns, and most of I think the action words and the verbs are generally Cree. A lot of the nouns so are in French, and so it's a combination French kind of sound because it is distinct. It's Michif. So it is interesting. Again, like I said, and in my family as well, there's also Bungi. So Bungi is a mix of all those languages, which is what generally the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish, English, a lot of them spoke in terms of it, because they combined it. They would speak Korean and they speak all these different other combinations of dialects as well. So I do have some links there for you guys as well for the Michif language. And this is the one I just don't think I have time to show you, but I would love to let you watch this. I'll just give you a synopsis. It's a history of the Métis jig. This video is amazing because it really gives you a really good snapshot into the combination of how we get the Métis jig, and really looking at the princes of First Nations dancing, such as the Prairie Chicken Dance, and you know, looking at Scottish jigging, and you know, the footwork that's done, and the timing, and the work that, and even the French Canadian jigging themselves from the French people there actually comes from the Irish more than anything. Because there were a lot of Irish. If you've been in Quebec, there's also a lot of Irish immigrants there too. And so that really had a distinct influence on those people. And so I encourage you, when you get the slides, to watch it. It's just a really cool, I could watch it. Oh, sorry, there you go. I could watch it all day long. It's a cool video. And then Métis food, right? We do have food that is very similar to First Nations. Bannock itself is, you know, widely accepted across North America now, but it's a Scottish food, right? So Bannock itself, fry bread is definitely more of a, you know, Indigenous take on it. Oh, Alexander, you use that one, yeah, during Métis Week. Yeah, I love that video. It's so amazing. Like I said, I could watch it over and over and over again. My grandpa jigged, and he would fiddle as the same time as he would jig. So every time I watch it, I get really nostalgic. I remember when I was a little girl watching him. Yeah, but you know, and so, and like, for instance, I just got my son-in-law's Métis as well from Edmonton, and he just went hunting. He brought me back a moose hide, so I'm going to be tanning that in the spring to make more rattles for our sweat lodge, and another drum, and you know, yeah, thank you, Julie. Yeah, when you get the slides, they'll be good. There's lots of good stuff in there. You know, and I got a moose roast and some ground moose. So I'm excited to make some food with that. So that's exciting, right? And but originally, Indigenous people used a plant called camas instead of flour, and because, you know, when Europeans came, they brought flour and baking powder. And so there's also some links there for food harvesting. So you can see a lot of it's very similar to First Nations as well, and some of our foods. What really makes us distinct, you know, we've been called the beadwork people. And lots of people around the world that are, you know, Indigenous all over the place do beadwork. And there's lots of places that do flower beadwork, right? Because that's very common as well. There are some specific differences for us, you know, in terms of, there's little, we call them mouse tracks that go along some of the stems, and the way the stems are joined and things like that. There's some little differences, and there's something called a spirit bead. You know, you'll put in, you know, that one error into your work to show that you're humble towards Creator, that you're not perfect, and you're not being prideful when you do it. Because there's some of the ladies are so good at beading. And I do have some other links here too. Like and you'll notice, like, Will was wearing a beaded vest. You know, if I look at some of these, like, I would love to get one of these. They're just so beautiful. Of course, women didn't always wear these. Like David Chartrand always wears the most amazing vests. He's got some really amazing ones he gets gifted, right? Like this one I love. I would love to have one like this. It's so cool. Matching hat. I love hats. I wear hats all the time. So if I could get that, that would be really cool. Right. And then, you know, on a coat. And so, yeah, there's no end to it, right? Like the women just, you know, you think some of them had so many kids, like, no, you know, at home, and they were always cooking and cleaning and doing all the things, but they still had time to bead and do all that stuff. And the capote, of course, is a very Métis item. It's a Hudson Bay blanket, and it's sewn into a coat, and then you use the sash around it to tie it up. And the sash itself was a multi-variable thing to use. It was used for everything. You could, you know, pull like behind you, trying to pull, you know, whatever, it might be a sled if you needed to. You'd carry things in it. You'd harvest with it. You know, it was used for your clothing. It was like, it was multi-purpose. You could use whatever you wanted to with it. And what I have included as well is a bunch of resources for you guys. I'll just show you a couple, but there's a lot of resources here. And this is a video. This is a really, I'm not going to show you the ad for you. Everybody's doing Christmas ads, but it's about Métis culture, just a 101. I included information about the Red River Resistance, because to me, that's kind of a sore spot as well, like I said. So there's some teaching resources here to teach this to kids and talking about that. You know, growing up in Manitoba, the only thing I learned about my culture was that Louis Riel was a trader, and So therefore, all Métis people must be traders as well. So I didn't really talk about it. Most of us didn't. And so I'm so glad that's changing for our people. And our kids can be proud of who they are. And of course, this is Rupert's Land Institute, and lots of really great resources here, and they're always developing more, tons of stuff for you guys to look at, you know, talking about our flag and the land and books and just, you know, more information about script and all that stuff for you guys to delve into. But yeah, I'm gonna end it there because I like to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, and I'm gonna stop share and I'm going to stop recording.